Hello everyone and welcome to the first Miss Strategies Middlegame show of 2017. You might have realized that I was away for a while. If you follow me on Facebook and Twitter, you should have seen that I was in Doha in Qatar being a commentator of the World Blitz and Rapid Championship. It was really cool there. And then heading to Zee to the Netherlands for the Tata Steel Chess Tournament. I was a reporter and commentator there as well. So two fantastic events. I just loved being there with all the top players, and also the atmosphere of these two events was just incredible. Not only because of the strong players, these top grandmasters, but also because of the amateurs, the chess fans. Because let's just remind us that yes, there are these players, the top 10, top 20, the world's elite chess players. But what makes up the most of us, the chess community, are people like you guys, the chess fans, and without you guys there would be no such events as the Tata Steel Chess Tournament, for instance. Lots of amateurs participating in small groups, and the whole atmosphere of the village is amazing. You see chess everywhere, in the cafes, in the bars, in the shops. There are chess pieces, chess sets, chess clocks everywhere, even chess menus. So really cool place. I'm recommending it to everybody to visit Zee once at least in their life and return if you like it there. Let's just start talking about today's topic. Before I go too much into details about my trips, you can see more about my previous events on Facebook and Twitter, as I mentioned. And today's topic is about good nights, which is, yeah, I know it's funny, but good nights, strong nights, we could say it that way as well. The bishop pair was our previous edition. Bishop pair, we saw some instructive games. We even practiced the bishop pair, how effective they can be in some thematic tournaments. And today, it's time to talk about the knights. Actually, this is one of my favorite topics because I love when there's an outpost in the position and you can place a knight there. So today will be about the d5 outpost for the knight, and we will see how strong a knight can be on this outpost. The first game, as you can see, is from Garry Kasparov against the Dutch Grandmaster Jérôme Piquet, and let's just go through the opening very quick. As usual, the Sicilian, and Kasparov went for the mover there, third, knight c3. This means that black can actually avoid d4, and that's what he did. But e5 is a move that I would not like to make. This is perfectly fine. Many people like playing this setup, having a pawn on c5, another on e5, then they will push d6, and they say it's safe. Well, I don't like holes in the position, and the d5 square is already a huge hole. So this position, just let's put it this way. It's objectively equal, but depending on your playing style and what you like about chess, for me, this position as white is beautiful. I would always take white here because I love the outpost that I can create on d5 for my knight. So let's see how Kasparov used the d5 square for his knight. It doesn't mean you need to jump there immediately. So placing the bishop on c4 is the first step because, hey, that diagonal is also weak. There's no d5 push ever. So bishop c4 is of course a great developing move, taking advantage of the fact that black cannot cover the d5 square with anything, any pawn, any piece. That's a square for you, that's a square for the white player. Bishop e7 was played, and d3, d6. And here comes the first surprise. I think all of us would think about moves like castle. Yeah, mainly castle. I think castle is the most natural move here, and it's perfectly fine. But Kasparov already goes for it. He plays knight d2, and this is the first task. Your task is to tell me, where is this knight heading to? What's the purpose of knight d2? And I see that I forgot to add this beautiful image, the time to think. So I will try to find it while you guys are discussing why this knight d2 is so good. Where is the knight heading to? So try to figure out what is the plan behind knight d2 while I fix this screen. Oh, there it is. Let's make it bigger. No, maybe not this big. I will cover the H file. Yeah, I think this is good. Well done, everybody. I think most of you have said that the idea must be that the knight will go to f1 and from f1 to e3, and from e3 it can jump to d5. So basically what white wants is to place a knight on d5, but just by placing the c3 knight on d5, it will not mean that you can keep this knight on d5. So in order to have a real outpost, a real strong monster knight on d5, you need support, and not only the support of the bishop and the pawn, because when this knight will be captured on d5, and let's face it, black can easily exchange a piece on d5, if not two. So you need as many pieces as possible, and especially your other knight, because you, in the end of the day, will want to have a knight on d5. So we shall maneuver our other knight also to a square from which it can jump to d5. Knight f1, knight e3. And why was it so important to play knight d2 now and not after castling? Well, the f1 square is available without castling. If you castle, you need to move the rook away from f1, then knight d2, then knight f1. So Kasparov is actually saving time for this knight maneuver. Knight f6, knight f1, look at that, knight a5, threatening this bishop on c4, but do you think he cared about it, that this bishop can be captured? This lesson is not about the bishop pair, so of course he gave away the bishop. He doesn't care about it. This position is closed, and in closed positions you will prefer to have knights, unless you can open up the position for your bishops. So the bishops will be powerful in open positions, in open diagonals, but in this position you will see that the knights are perfect. And so he did not care about knight takes c4. And second task, how do you take back? With the knight or with the pawn? Just a quick second to think about this, because I think you can figure out very quickly the right answer. You all voted for pawn takes c4, and that's what Gary played. So well done, everybody. You played like Kasparov. We take back with the pawn because all we care about in this position is the d5 square. So by capturing on c4 with the pawn, it's true that we are doubling our c pawns, but this pawn is a very useful pawn. Sometimes, can I pronounce sometimes? Yeah, sometimes double pawns can be extremely good. They open files, so since the pawn is not on d3, you suddenly have a semi-open file. Also, this pawn is supporting the d5 square. You have a c4 pawn, you have an e4 pawn, you have a semi-open d file, and there's a huge hole on d5. That's the outpost we are playing for in this whole game. On top of that, it's not only the d5 square, but after the capture on c4 with the pawn, look at this pawn on d6. That's a backward pawn. That's a weakness forever. There's no other pawn supporting it, and black cannot push this pawn. It means that he will have to be protecting this pawn always with pieces, because you can double rooks on the d file, you can attack the d6 pawn with other pieces too, so that's a weakness that you will be attacking. d5 square for your knight, and the d6 pawn will always be a target. This is what we have so far, and this position is still supposed to be close to equal, but I still love it. I love this position, and it will just get even better. So, okay, maybe now the NG would say it's already some advantage for white, but definitely not decisive. For me, to my heart, this position is almost winning. I know that's too much to say, but I like these positions a lot. Do you agree with me, guys? Let me know in the chat if you also like playing such positions as white. I feel like this is, I can never lose this position. All I play for is this d5 square, the weak pawn on d6. So yeah, so even if it's not such a huge advantage, I love these kind of positions. That's what I wanted to say about this. Castle, And queen f3 was played by Kasparov. You can play castle here, you can play b3. There are so many good moves in this position. There's no one line that has to be played, but he goes for queen f3 for a reason. And you guys should figure out why. Why Kasparov played queen f3? What is his plan? Please try to figure out his next moves. How does he want to place his pieces? I think you will manage. I think you can. Just think of his style. Remember his playing style. Well done for those who suggested basically any move, because in this position you can castle kingside and play positional chess. That's what I would have done. I would have castled kingside, then I place my rooks on the d file, I place a knight on d5, and that's it. That's the way I like to play. But this is Kasparov, so he was not satisfied with having this positional advantage only. He also wanted to give mate. So yes, there's a backward pawn on d6 and there's an outpost on d5, but he wants to mate the king on g8. So of course he went for castling on the opposite flank, and in order to castle queenside, he needs to play bishop d2, castle queenside, and push those pawns, g4, h4, h5. All those moves were definitely in Kasparov's mind in the moment he played queen f3. So let's see how he carried out all those plans. Remember, it doesn't mean that that's the only way to play. That's how you play when you want to go aggressive. So if you like attacking chess, if you want to play dynamic, then you go for bishop d2 or g4 or h4 and you castle queenside. If you want to play positional chess, slowly but surely winning this game, you castle kingside, you double rooks on the d file, and so on and so on. This is Kasparov's after g6. He went for g4 and bishop e6 was responded by h4. He's definitely showing that he doesn't want to castle kingside. He's going for castle queenside and mate attack. Queen d7, rook g1. Of course you have to protect this pawn, so he is lacking some development. His king is still on e1, but he's happy because he knows that his attack will just roll after pawn pushes like h5, g5. King h8, trying to get out of the g file just in case. And here he goes a4, and I think this is a move that I actually didn't want you to guess because I wouldn't have guessed it, and I think that also some GMs wouldn't have played a4, but it's actually a very smart move. But if you remember that he wants to castle queenside, it also feels a bit illogical that he pushes a pawn on the queenside. What Kasparov wanted to reach, to achieve with this a4 push, is that black will never be able to push b5 himself. So he wants to prevent any kind of counterplay. He doesn't want to allow black expanding on the queen side and creating open files. Still, if I want to castle queenside, I would keep the pawn on a2 and keep my king as safe as possible. This is Kasparov. He thought that he would never get mated, so he's okay pushing the a pawn, and then he will still castle queenside. Rook g8, b3. And you see that black was trying, well, was trying. He actually placed the rooks on g8 and f8. So he moved away the king from the g file, then he placed the rook on g8 and another on f8. All this in order to defend his king, but I think it's too passive. And also, it doesn't feel so safe that the king is on h8 and white has this b2 bishop. Imagine that one day you could open the long diagonal and there's this king on h8. It will be basically dead because it has nowhere to go. It has no space. There's no air around the king. So yeah, he's trying to protect it by placing those rooks on g8 and f8, but I don't know. I think it's too passive. Not that it's easy to play against Kasparov this position. I would have lost it already. But I don't think that this is helping black. Let's see what happened in the game. He pushed h5 trying to provoke something, and here either g takes h5, very logical. You want to open the position and then you castle, so this is good and white has an advantage. Or what Kasparov played, he pushes g5, which you could say that why is he closing the g file? Isn't it the file that he wanted to open? Yes, but g5 takes away a lot of space. So right now what you see is that it's true that he didn't manage to open the king side, but this knight is suffering. There's no good square for the f6 knight. You either go knight e8, ouch, or knight h7, ouch. Both of them are pretty bad, and if the knight leaves the f6 square, you can jump to d5 finally without any minor piece trades. So by chasing away the f6 knight, you actually play for a knight d5 jump, and when the bishop takes your knight, look how useful it was to place the other knight on e3. So you will end up having a knight on the d5 outpost, and that's what we wanted, but not immediately. First, he prevents any kind of counterplay. Prophylaxis, once again, just like the a4 push, he once again thinks of the opponent's plan first. The opponent would love to open the f file because having the rooks on f8 and g8, the only possible way to make sense for this setup is by pushing f6. So if he can open the f file, suddenly those rooks would be active. That's why he moves away the queen from the f file in order to prevent this. And when black plays f6, it's your turn to think. What else was the purpose of queen g3? He stepped out of the f file, and also in this very moment, how do you think he wanted to respond to the move f6? Remember that our target, besides the d6 backward pawn, that's a positional weakness, besides the outpost on d5, that's also a strategic point, he wants to attack the h8 king. So how to respond to f6? Let's see. What would you play if you were Kasparov? Very good job once again. You guys are awesome. f4 is a very strong move because remember that we want to open the long diagonal. We want to give mate to the h8 king, and one very good way to do that is by pushing f4 right now. And we say that, okay, you can take on g5, you can take on f4, but in the end what happens is that your king will be unprotected on the long diagonal, and the b2 bishop will be ready for the kill. So f4, very strong move, and I think black is already very much in trouble. Already after queen g3, of course, this position was, I think, very difficult. Black's pieces were too passive, so with the knight on h7, very bad piece, a rook on g8, very bad piece. The f8 rook is also very bad unless you push f6, so he was mainly forced to go for this push, even if he would like to keep the position close. So you either have no active pieces or you open some of the files, some of the lines for white as well. I saw in the chat some of you mentioned that it's interesting that black also created holes in white's position, or we could say that white was okay accepting that some of the squares, for instance the b4, the d4 and the f4 squares, are holes. And that's true, that's a very good point. But these squares, or any square basically, any square in chess is only weak if you can exploit it. So the b4 square, the d4 square and the f4 square are not weak unless black can place a piece there. So imagine if he had his knight on e6, a knight ready to jump to d4, to f4. Now that would be a perfect place for the black knight, but it's not there. And they did not manage to maneuver the knight to e6 or to c6. So Kasparov made sure that black didn't have any such maneuvers, that he did not have the opportunity to exploit the weakness on d4, on f4, on b4. So it's true that yes, those could be outposts as well, not the same way as the d5 square. For instance, imagine there's a knight on b4, you can still push c3 at some point. So it's not the same. The d5 square is a hole where there's just no push. There's no, I'm drawing too many arrows, I think, but I will draw a few more. There's no c6 push, there's no e6 push. So this is the clear definition of an outpost. It's a hole in the pawn structure where if you place a piece, it cannot be chased away because there's just no pawn ever that can attack it. Black might be able to exchange that piece, to trade this piece for another minor piece, but he can never attack it with a pawn because of the pawn structure. So this is a real outpost, the d5 square. f6, f4 was played because we want to open the position, we want to give mate to the h8 king, and well, black had to try to open the f file at least for his rook, so that it's not a set piece on f8, and rook g8, he wants to double rooks on the f file. Castle, finally, this is move number 21, finally we castled. Remember that he could have castled like a move 5, but instead he went for the knight maneuver, and then he went pushing the g and h pawns because he was not afraid of his king being attacked on e1. So that's Kasparov. a6, trying to push b5 because of course black has to. He has to try to attack the king on the queen side. So it's not only the h8 king that is under attack and he resigns, but he wants to push b5, and maybe he will. But white seems to be much faster, and also look at his pieces. The rook on a semi-open d file, the other rook can go to f1, or you can double rooks on the d file. The knights are ready to jump to the outpost on d5. This bishop is very strong. Remember that this is the good bishop of white. If we had a bishop on d3, that would be a bad bishop. It's a bad bishop because you have pawns, many pawns in the center on light squares. So it restricts the mobility of a light square bishop. But the dark square bishop is the good bishop in this position. And if just once we could somehow capture this pawn on d6, then the e5 pawn will fall as well. And suddenly the whole long diagonal opens up for that b2 bishop. It's a very strong bishop with a good perspective. You will see soon that it's a bishop that can change the whole game, basically. Not only because of the bishop. It's about the knight, but the bishop is also strong. And the queen, well, it's well placed on g3, not like we are threatening something at the moment, but all the white pieces are active. And if you look at the black camp, black's pieces, I think the saddest piece, actually no, I would say two very sad pieces are the h7 knight, has nowhere to go, and the e7 bishop. Now that's the clear definition of bad bishop. So it's not only that your own pawns are on the same color, restricting the mobility of this bishop, but also white has placed these pawns on that color, so you basically have no space for this bishop, nowhere to go, no diagonal. The only maneuver I can see for this bishop is something like bishop d8 and bishop a5, and praying that the opponent will not move the knight away so you can capture this knight, and then you can say that you used the bishop for something. If the knight moves away from 3-3, the whole point of placing the bishop on a5 will be just 0. So that's a very bad bishop. Very bad bishop on e7, very bad knight on h7, while all the white pieces are perfect. And here comes the knight jump, knight cd5. So as we mentioned, if black takes this knight, you take back with the knight. And this is extremely important, not only in this position, but remember that when there's a hole in the opponent's camp, you never want to capture with a pawn. So the only way to take advantage of these kind of structural weaknesses is that you always take back with a piece, unless there's, I don't know, imagine this would be a knight, this would be a fork. Imagine that was a piece on c6 and another on e6, and it's a fork, you win a piece, well done, take back with a pawn. But almost always, for the sake of keeping this hole in the position, you should take back with a piece. If you did not have a knight on e3, take back with the rook. Just make sure that the hole remains there. If you capture with a pawn, you change the pawn structure and there's no weakness on d5. The d6 pawn is suddenly not weak anymore, and this is perfectly fine for black. Remember that. So knight takes, and we are happy. We have the knight on d5, and once again, just have a look at the e7 bishop, have a look at the h7 knight, and try to imagine a maneuver in order to trade the h7 knight for the d5 knight. I mean, how many moves would it take to actually threaten to capture on d5? It feels like it takes ages. You need to move the rook away from f8, you need to go to f8, then to e6, and then to f4 or c7. So it takes tons of time, and black doesn't have this amount of time. Even if he managed to carry out this plan, we would take back on d5 with a piece, with a rook, and that would be an example for a good bishop versus a bad bishop, because our bishop is good and the e7 bishop will be bad forever. But since today's topic is the good knight, you can imagine that this knight will not disappear from the position. So there will be a knight on d5 for the whole game until black resigns. Knight cd5, bishop d8, trying to do something about this bishop, but you will see that it's not easy. Rook d3, threatening to double rooks, and after queen f7, he could have played rook d1 if he wanted, but the most important is that you always pay attention to the opponent's threat. So if he wants to go for queen f2, he wants to have the f file at least. Why do you want to give him counterplay? Don't give him counterplay. Rook f1 first, and after the queen moves, now we go rook d1 or knight f6. Both are good moves. The point is that first we always prevented the opponent's ideas, and then we went for our plan. So he didn't jump to this d5 square for like 20 moves. He didn't double rooks under d5 for a while. In the end he did, but first he prevented all the possible counterplay of black, and he gained lots of space on the king side. So see that those moves were very useful, and that's why black's position is horrible, because he's lacking space. He has a horrible bishop on d8 and a horrible knight on h7. And now this is the only moment when he could actually get rid of either the bad knight or the bad bishop. But that would be just way too expensive. Let's say here, or a move of before when actually Kasparov went for knight f6. This could be taken, yes. But that's just too big of a price to pay, because if you capture everything on f6, the d6 pawn falls, and this is what I was trying to explain before, that once the d6 pawn falls, the e5 pawn as well is a horribly weak pawn. So we will capture this pawn next move, and all our pieces are fine, all our pieces are active. Let's just demonstrate what could have happened queen e7, you take on e5, and this is a pawn up and very active pieces. The black king is still in danger, so you can understand that Piquet was not going for this. Knight f6, queen c6, and now after doubling rooks, the same story. We will capture this d6 pawn if you take on f6. So bishop c7 protecting the pawn, but look at this. This is a huge pawn. I call these kind of bishops a giant pawn because it's not doing anything. It's just doing the same purpose as a pawn on c7 would do. That's very sad. That's very sad for a bishop. The knight went back to d5 because he wants to capture this c7 bishop only for the sake of winning the d6 pawn. So you would never capture this pawn unless you are winning material. Bishop b8 and now a5. This is just making sure that everything is fixed. Black can never push b5 because we will take it. We capture on b6 and that's it. He cannot move his pieces. The b8 bishop is dead. The h7 knight is dead. He is lacking space. He has no active plan. This position is basically lost. Black cannot do anything. King g8, bishop c3. White is not in a rush when you have such a position with a positional advantage. So you have a strategically winning position. Remember that. That means that you are not in a rush. So there's a huge difference between having a position that's tactically winning, you sacrifice a piece and you have to give mate, you are in a rush. But if you have outposts, you have these weak pawns in the opponent's camp, so his position is bad strategically. He's got weaknesses in the pawn structure and you've got a lot better piece setup. Your pieces are much better. You're not in a rush because the pawn structure will be the same. And he cannot improve his pieces because he is lacking space and he's lacking activity. You can improve your pieces step by step. You can make moves like bishop c3, king b2. You are not in a rush. So that's what Kasparov is doing. He is not in a rush. He is just improving his pieces step by step. You can't say that bishop c3 and king b2 changed the position a lot, but it's a small improvement and he's not in a rush. And here, it might sound unbelievable, but the opponent, a grandmaster, very strong grandmaster at the time himself, of course not world champion like Kasparov, but still a very strong grandmaster, he blundered his queen. He moved the rook away from f7 and blundered knight e7. Ouch, resign. So this is how the game finished. But it doesn't mean that Kasparov won only because of a blunder. This position is winning for white and we will demonstrate it. So let's just make a move for black. Not easy because he can barely move his pieces. He can barely move anything. Like I would say you can move the rook on the 7th rank. Rook g7 and coming back. Wow. What else can you do? Well, you can move the queen. Anyway, it's just very sad that black has no plan. So let's make a king move. Now this is the game. Rook f4 really happened in the game. That's incredible. King g7, let's say. And in this position, when all your pieces as white are perfectly placed, and especially when the king is on the dangerous long diagonal, that means that many times you will have a tactical solution. So after king g7, for instance, white is winning on the spot already. Knight c7. Look at that. That's just a piece sacrifice like this. Thunderbolt. Bishop takes, of course, should be played. If not, this knight will capture the e6 bishop. So knight c7. You can take it with the rook. You can take it with the bishop. You can take it with the queen. It doesn't matter what black does. He's lost. The point of knight c7 is that after bishop takes, you even sacrifice your rook. Rook takes d6. And the whole point was that now after rook takes d6, queen takes d6 would be the normal capture and you win the queen. And this position wins because you have a queen for 2 rooks, but those rooks are not active. They cannot move. You will capture the pawn on g6 as well. You have a passed pawn and a very strong knight. Remember, this knight is still very strong. That's our today's topic. And so this was just to demonstrate a line where actually there's a direct way to win. And also if after rook takes d6, queen takes e4, it's still winning because this position too, look at this, you can exchange queens, you are exchanged down as white, but your pieces are so strong that even with an exchange down, this position is winning because you will have a knight on d5, you have a bishop on e5, and the rook is about to capture the g6 pawn. So it doesn't really matter what he does. He can go like rook c8, you take on g6, check, and that's it. This was not forced. This is not a forced line. I mean, king g7 is not something that had to be played after king b2, but I just wanted to show that it's extremely difficult to play this position as black and not to blunder. So even without blundering your queen, it's just so difficult to move the black pieces and not lose on the spot. That's how it goes when there's a beast, a monster on the d5 square. It can never be captured because you have another beast jumping to d5. Remember that you always want to take back with a piece. On an outpost, you don't want this hole to disappear from the opponent's camp. You want to take advantage of the d5 square. And there's one more game to see, because I hope that you enjoyed this one. You can analyze this position. So you can find this game, Kasparov Pick8, in the database on Chess24. You can analyze this position. Make sure that after king b2, you try a few moves for black. So I do recommend that you actually try a few options for black. What happens if rook g7? What happens if queen d7? There will be no direct win, but you can keep on improving the position as white, and you can act. You can go for something concrete the moment you choose. That's the advantage of this position too. All your pieces are superior, your pawn structure is superior, even an endgame would be winning. So you can basically do anything. Try to practice this position. How would you win this position if, let's say, black goes rook g7? You can practice it against a friend, you can play this position against a computer, you can just analyze it. I think this is a very nice position to practice. So make sure that you do that if you want to analyze more the power of the d5 outpost, this super knight on d5. And the other game that I wanted to show you today is a game by Vishy Anand, the symmetrical variation of the English opening. And I think we will not discuss these moves as usual. Let's just, yeah, we skip this. This is a Maroczy setup when you have a pawn on e4 and c4 against the Sicilian. And yeah, we will stop here, basically. So after knight d7, you have a decision to take. First of all, the decision to take is whether you will want to capture on g7 or you want to avoid exchange of these pieces. You should think about that. The other one is, well, you know our today's topic, so you know that at some point you want to jump to d5 with the knight. Tell me if you would jump to d5 now, whether you would capture first on g7. What do you prefer in this position? It's not like a winning move, but just think about this position as if it was your game and tell me what would you play if you were white in this position. Oh my, what am I opening? I'm opening many windows that are not supposed to be open. I hope that you can still see me because I'm almost closed my show. Oh, yeah. The usual clumsiness. And that's the chat. Great. You see the board now. I hope you see it. Yeah. Cool. So, time to think. I'm sorry about my clumsiness. Usual stuff. Let's discuss what happened in the game. Most of you have suggested the same idea actually. So Vichy took on g7 and then jumped to d5. You can jump to d5 first too, but it's somewhat better after capturing on g7 because you always have this queen d4 or queen c3 check in the air. It doesn't mean that you have to give a check now, but imagine that your queen is attacked and you can give a check. You can move away from the attack with a check, and that's always good. So just keep in mind that you have queen d4 or queen c3 will be useful. And knight d5, that's the whole point of today's show, that we want to jump to the d5 square with the knight. It's not the same scenario as the previous game. Remember that in the previous game there was a pawn on c5 and another on e5. So that was like a real hole, the d5 square, and we used it as an outpost. Here it is not the outpost that we say like, oh, an outpost is when it's a hole in the pawn structure, you cannot attack it with a pawn. It's not the same. It's not the same because black can go e6. But basically the d5 knight in this position functions almost the same way as if it was a real outpost. Why am I saying this? The reason is that if ever black pushes e6, it means that yes, he can chase the knight away, but look at the d6 pawn. We are winning the queen right now, so that's, but even without winning the queen, I just want you to think about the pawn structure. So this, in this position, it will be a horrible move. Knight f4 wins the queen, but try to think abstractly just about the pawn structure, not the queen on h3. Imagine the black queen is on b8. What I mean is that after e6, even if it was a good move, the d6 pawn would be a backward pawn. It would be a very weak pawn, and we have the d file for our major pieces. So you can double rooks, you can triple your major pieces on the d file and attack this d6 pawn. So that's why this knight on d5 will always be very useful, even without winning the queen. So with the queen on b8, it would be just as good as it is now. Knight c5 was played. Of course, black is trying to be active, but that's what I was saying, that you can just give this check when the queen is hanging, so you move away from the attack with a check, you keep the initiative, and after e5 this is a real outpost. So this is what we call an outpost, a hole in the opponent's camp that you use as a strong square for your piece. That's an outpost, and we already have the knight there. That's cool. Once again, I want you to just briefly think, how many moves would it take for black to actually challenge this knight, since the definition of an outpost is that there's no pawn that can attack your piece. It has to be the knight, it has to be the black knight that needs to maneuver in order to trade the knight on d5. How many moves does it take? It takes ages. Let's say this way, here, here. Once again, way too many moves, because white will not be just sitting quiet and not doing anything. He will go for the attack right now, actually, on this very move. So black will have no time to challenge the d5 knight. Another thing that you will soon see is that if black cannot go for the trade of this d5 knight, then he also has a square that is weak in our camp, because in the Maroczy setup, you push e4, you push c4, and the d4 square is weak. So black can actually go for knight e6 and head to d4. So we will see a position where both white and black manages to place the knights on outposts on d5 and on d4. What happens? Well, is that after f4, of course Vichy is attacking, he wants to open the position. Now it's not the bishop, but the queen on the long diagonal we want to open. The long diagonal, attack the king on g7 and give mate. With the knight on d5 and the queen on c3, that would be actually quite easy to do. So black doesn't allow it. He jumps to d4 and he closes the long diagonal. He's threatening knight e2. That would be painful to blunder. And it is your turn to move. What do you do after knight d4? Is it already like bad? So now black equalized. He also has a strong knight. We both have these these beautiful knights on d5, on d4. What do you think about this position? Is it equal? Is it that we cannot do anything about this knight on d4? What would you play here if you were Rishi? Let's see. It can be seen that you guys have practiced a lot of tactics. You must have participated in Sopikos shows often, or you might have trained with a tactics trainer. I don't know which, maybe both that you have done. But it's great. It's great that you guys have such a tactical vision. Rook takes d4, sacrificing an exchange. That is the solution. So you give away a rook in order to eliminate this strong knight, because a knight on d4 on d5 is a monster, and it can be actually as worthy as a rook, if not more. So the knight on d5, you will see. Now black has no knight on d4. He has a rook that is on b7 and another on f8. Not very active rooks, but he has two rooks. And we have a knight, a monster knight, and a pawn for the rook. Check. He has to defend. He cannot allow knight f6 check, so there's no way he can go king g8 or king h7, because after knight f6 check, this is over. That's it. Even if we are not winning immediately, this position has to be winning, because with the king in a discovered attack, in a discovered check, you can push f5 and you can just, I mean, this queen is basically trapped just to begin with. Even this maneuver could be really cool. Rook f4, rook h4. That's just an idea. I don't want to discuss this position because there are many ways to win this. The point is not this. The point is that this position is winning also if black is not about to be mated. After f6, it feels like the black king is not so bad. It's got some space. You have the two rooks protecting it. The queen on h3, well, still weird, but well, what can you do? And the knight on d5 will prove to be stronger than the two knights. The two rooks. I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. f5. You close the diagonal of the queen, because this queen on h3, even if it looks like active, it's weird. It is weird, and after f5, you see how weird it is. It's basically trapped. Also, f5 threatens to capture on g6. Anything that opens the position for the rook is cool. For your rook, not for the opponent's rook. g5. Of course, black doesn't want to allow f takes g6. And now it is your turn to think. So, well, actually, there are other possibilities too, but there's one way to win material. And I think it's easy to guess that what I was trying to say is that the queen is almost trapped on h3. So yes, this position is beautiful because we have this super strong knight on d5, but sometimes you will need to give up this knight for the sake of winning material. How do we do that? Let's see. That's it. You guys are tactic geniuses. I will tell Sopiko that I'm very proud of you guys, that you see everything, you see all the combinations. Knight f4, attacking the queen. Yes, it can be captured, but after g takes, rook takes, and rook h4 will win the queen. There's no way to prevent this move. And you can see how beautiful this knight on f4 is. Well, you could try queen g4, but it's already fishy. It already feels like the queen is, well, it's still almost trapped. So it's not literally trapped, but it has basically 0 squares. A queen is supposed to be having lots of diagonals, lots of lines, lots of possible moves. A normal queen has so many available squares, like this queen on d4. So when you see a queen that has basically no good moves at all, that means that the queen is in trouble. And even if you don't win it immediately, or you don't win it at all, the queen is bad, and let the opponent suffer. Let him have this queen on g4. Not being able to move the queen is sometimes worse than winning it for a knight and a rook. So you keep this queen on the board, but it cannot move, and you have this knight e6 check too. So yeah, this position is winning no matter what. You can just capture this rook basically and win, because you... Which one do you prefer? Queen takes f6 or queen takes d6? Both are good, and the queen on g4 is still bad. So many things are happening in this position. Nothing good for black. He took the knight because he thought that, okay, it's better to give up the queen, and then he will have 2 rooks for the queen. So it shouldn't be that bad. He thought this was, by the way, a simultaneous exhibition. So just imagine Vishy going board by board in a simul, spending 2-3 seconds on each move, and then he goes for f5, knight f4, you know, just like this. So easy for them. They just spot it immediately. Second nature. So yes, he won the queen, and this position is winning because the rooks are not active enough, and the queen is a lot more powerful here. You're threatening the f6 pawn, the d6 pawn. You will create a passed pawn. Let's see how the game finished, because this is not our today's topic anymore, but I still want to show that it's really cool. For instance, this h3 move. I can imagine when Vishy played this in the simul, and if rook takes king g3, would have won the rook. Pretty tactics, not difficult, but still pretty. And yeah, he took the pawn, and then he created a c-passed pawn. This is a clear example for the case where the queen is definitely better than the rooks, and that is because of the fact that the black rooks are not active enough. They are not attacking the white king, while the black king is exposed. So white always threatens queen takes f6. The rook from f7 cannot go away, and also from the 7th rack you can't really go away. That's his main problem. He cannot mobilize those rooks. He was trying to prevent the c7 push, but after a few more moves, Vishy just brought the king as well. Checks, check. You can go through these moves by finding the game in the database. So remember that this is not about that I don't care about these moves. Simply for the sake of saving time, I just want to show you the final position. This is where black resigned, threatening mate on g6, and if black prevents it, he would have played queen b8, threatening queen h8, and then king d6, c7. You can finally push the pawn and promote it. Black can never take the pawn on c7 because the pawn endgame would be lost for him too. So this is the final position, but what we care about from this game is that we had this knight on d5. First, it was not a real outpost, but it was a cool post. Let's call it like that. I just made it up. So there's no definition for such a square. It's a nice place for the knight, the d5 square. Not an outpost because black can push e6. Not here. That would be a blunder. But as I said, try to think abstractly. Imagine this queen on b8. Imagine that black pushes e6. In that case, he manages to chase away our knight from d5, but he weakens the d6 square, the d6 pawn forever, and that's a semi-open file. You bring all your major pieces to the d5 and you capture the d6 pawn. That's the plan. If he doesn't do that, you keep the knight on d5 and you're happy. What happened in the game was that black also wanted to have a knight on d4. So as I said, it takes ages to trade the two knights. You cannot really go for knight d7, knight b8, knight c6, knight e7. No, you don't have time for that. You will get mated by the time you are on c6 or such, so don't do that. What he did was trying to create counterplay, pushing e5, going for knight e6, knight d4, and it was not a bad plan, but it's not working in this position. It's too slow because Vishy could sacrifice the exchange for this monster knight, so he remains with the d5 knight, eliminating the opponent's d4 knight. I hope that you found these two games instructive, and as I said, please, if you want to analyze these games, make sure that you find them in the database. You see the names there. I wish I could tell you the years, but I don't have them written here. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I don't think, for instance, that Vishy Anand played against Rafael Barverde too often, so you will definitely find this game, and also Kasparov's game with the white pieces against Jeroen Piquet, the Dutch grandmaster who retired a couple of years ago, but was very strong, a very strong grandmaster at that time. So the reason that the game finishes with the blunder doesn't mean that he wouldn't have lost the game if he did not go rook f4. Remember, this is the finishing position, but even without rook f4, this position is horrible for black, and please practice it. Just feel it on your own skin. Feel how powerful this knight on d5 is. So that has been all for today. I will be back next week with more shows, probably more good nights, and Sopiko will also be back, of course, but she will be playing the Women's World Championship, so you should be cheering for Sopiko, and let's hope that she will get to the finals. And if she gets to the finals, it means that she will have no shows next week, neither in 2 weeks, but we want her to win the World Championship. So cheer for Sopiko for not streaming anytime soon, because that will mean that she proceeds to the next round, Remember that it's a knockout system, that the best women in the world will be playing, with some exceptions who are not going to Iran. So some players cancelled, but many really strong ones will be there in Iran, and she is one of the participants. We should all be cheering for her, and she should not be streaming this month. She should go ahead and win the tournament. That's what I hope for. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you once again for being so great. Usually you are such a great audience, and today was just the same. You had some brilliant ideas, you found out the best maneuvers, the best plans, also the tactics were great. And this is not a tactics show, but I'm happy that also Sopiko taught you so many ideas, missed tactics wise. So I'm doing the strategy part, and she covers everything that's about dynamics and about attacking, about seeing these beautiful tactical motifs. Both games actually finished because of tactics, so you know that strategy and tactics go hand in hand, and that's why we are best friends with Sopiko. Well, no, it's not the reason, but it's true that strategy and tactics complement one another. By the way, you might have seen that I have I kinda forgot that I'm wearing this the whole time. So those who were wondering why I have a bandage on my arm, is that I gave blood a few hours ago, but I'm completely fine. It's just for the sake of wanting to help others, and I also want to suggest that you give blood as well if you can, because I think this world should be as nice as possible, and if we can help others, that's even better. So if you can help other people who might need blood, that's great. I was not paid for telling you to give blood. I just think that's the right thing to do. So it was great that you were here. It was great that we were studying chess, and it's also cool that I can also try to encourage other people to do good stuff for others who are less lucky than us. I will see you guys next week. Let me know in the chat how you like the show, and also in a YouTube comment if you are watching this on YouTube. Bye bye!